All right, friends. Welcome to Salt City Hoops live postcast. Had to figure out the microphone there for a second. Didn't have it plugged in. I hear you need that to get things going. Jazz lose a close one, 103-100 against the Mavericks. Tight one. Again, on the road, good team, playoff contender, possible championship contender. Took them to the wire. This Jazz team is still surprising us in every way. 6-3 on the season, good performance. Had some people that I wish we saw a little bit more out of. We'll talk about that in a minute. Have the Clippers and Lakers still on the road coming up next. Still an inspired effort from the Jazz. It was not lazy, bad, blowout performance. It was just really impressive, nice basketball for the most part, with just a few critical errors, either like a player's overall performance or some individual play performances that were bad. So glad you're here. Love having people on the postcast to chat a little bit. This is also the postcast and beer, so I have to find a new beer. So let's make sure we get one of those fired up. Happy to be here. Let's make sure we get everyone in board so I can get this 3-layer cake Imperial Porter cracked open. Hopefully we'll have a good time today. Love this team. Still had a great time watching it today. Hopefully you had a chance to check out a piece that I wrote that released today that basically chastised you if you're not having fun. I really just want to make sure that, if the team is going to be playing well, it isn't the end of the world. And I think there are a lot of people who have a lot of tunnel vision as to there's only one outcome of the season that can possibly matter, and that's getting the first overall pick, or at least putting themselves in position to do so, noting that the worst seed in the NBA still only gets a 14% chance at the top pick. And you get a situation where you can do all this losing and wading through total shit, and you end up with the 4th pick or the 5th pick. By the way, if you finish with the worst pick, you have a less than 50% chance of getting a top 3 pick. Like, worse than a coin flip to get a top 3 pick. I think that's pretty notable. I wrote a piece on that today. And so I walked in today. Hopefully I convinced somebody, literally anybody else, to walk in today's Mavericks game and say, you know what? Maybe I'll try to enjoy it a little bit. Maybe I will enjoy this basketball team and who's playing a little bit better than I anticipated. And the way they're playing is exciting. They're passing the ball a lot. There's lots of turnovers. I had a tweet to get a little traction, at least for my standards, that mentioned that the Jazz were third in forcing turnovers this year. Third in percentage of defensive possessions where they forced a turnover. And the reason that stat is notable, not because obviously being third is great, but the team has finished 28th, 29th, and last in the league the past 3 years with the personnel and coaching that we had. It wasn't necessarily an indictment on those guys that we weren't forcing turnovers, but it isn't that fun, right? It's just let the guy go by and let Rudy Gobert do his job, and you can get some highlight blocks from Rudy Gobert from time to time, but you never saw a whole lot of guys just taking chances and diving into passing lanes, and those turnovers will get fast break layups and dunks that really can thrill the crowd. So they're a little bit more exciting brand of basketball, right? Francis in the YouTube chat, are the Jazz better off trying for a playoff run? I'm not necessarily thinking like, okay, so we got all these draft assets. Let's turn it all into making and going for 46 wins. I think that is going for the treadmill of mediocrity that we've seen Charlotte and New York and Detroit before they got the first overall pick. That's what they tried to do. They had a 35-win squad and tried to make it a 41-win squad, and they would spend assets to do so. And I think that's a huge mistake. My entire angle is, if the team wins 35 games rather than 23 games, that's not the end of the world. And if they do win 35 games, that means that something is going well for the team. That matters for the future, not just for this season winning 35 games, but in order for the Jazz to be better than a 25-win team, it must mean that Lauri Markkanen is way better than we think. It must mean Colin Sexton's taking a jump. It must mean that one of the rookies is really shining out, right? we know what Mike Conley is. He's on the decline. We absolutely know what Rudy Gay is. He's on the decline. We're seeing a jump from Jordan Clarkson. That's another thing that can be a little bit of a bump, but he's 31 years old, right? Jordan Clarkson is probably the only player where I can sit here and think, I wish he wasn't this good, right? Because he's not somebody that you're going to look at a Jazz contending team 2, 3, 4 years from now and say, like, that's a guy who's going to matter for the Jazz. But he's obviously the best culture person that we have on the team. So there's a little bit of hemming and hawing that I have for that. And Malik Beasley, I think, is a guy who's you're not going to get some pop out of him. He said he wants to make an all-star game, right, at some point in his career. I just don't think he has the skills and the tools to be that sort of all-around player that begets all-star games. So I think that the cap on the team is limited, and dumping a bunch of assets to go win 43 games is really stupid. I think what you're looking for is, let's add lottery talent to this team. And I just am not sold that trading off players like Markkanen or in that vein is worth the drop off that you might be able to maybe get the first overall lottery odds. Noting again that the first overall lottery odds don't really get you shit since 2019, right? The worst lottery odds haven't gotten the best overall pick in the 4 years that the new lottery odds have been implemented. It's been second overall, like seventh when the Pelicans got Zion, and I think third with Magic this past year, maybe fourth. But the counter argument is like, well, we want the Jazz to be second, third, fourth worst, and not like eighth worst. And I think the Jazz can actually get there, right? Like this surprising success this year, if they actually accidentally turn this into a 43-win team, which, guys, I love the start. I'm thrilled. I'm enjoying the wins. They're not a 43-win team, and shit's going to get real hard pretty quickly. I mean, we're starting on this road trip against the Mavericks, Clippers, and Lakers. I'm not exactly sure how far that's going to get us, but this is not quite a 43-win outfit. But if they are a 43-win outfit, that means Markkanen's an all-star. Not just taking the leap and doing and being a pretty competent player. It means like he's an all-star. I'm going to abruptly transition the game talking about Markkanen because he was a quiet 14-7 today. Because Markkanen was the reason I still think his ceiling is a top 40-ish player. He's barely been a top 100 guy in his career, maybe a top 80, 90 player. He just will never be more than a top 40 player because he is such a dependent threat. Now, he's a fabulous dependent threat. I mean, it doesn't mean we have tons of dependent threats make all-star games, right? We've had a couple sneak into all-NBA discussions. And what I mean by dependent threat is it doesn't mean, you can toss the guy the ball at the top of the arc and he's going to ISO and make plays. Now, that's certainly a big part of what an independent threat can be. Right? Like you have a Luka or even a Jordan Clarkson or even going down the list to like a Mike Conley, right? He can be an independent threat, like having a good dribble game. As far as larger players, right? Like a Chris Bosh or a Dirk Nowitzki, like those guys are independent threats that you don't necessarily need to run things for them and get them the ball on the catch and getting towards the basket. A lot of Markkanen's success comes off of getting the ball assisted to him. He's has a uncanny knack for cutting. He's got an uncanny knack for offensive rebounding, really finding his way around the rim. He's got great touch. And I'm not asking for post-ups, but when you're a big man, you kind of need to have a little bit more of a skill set to reach into that top 20 level of a player. Can you pass? Are you a stellar, unbelievable defender? No, Markkanen's still just like an okay defender, a way better rebounder than I think I anticipated, especially playing alongside Olynyk and Vanderbilt. But he's okay defender, and he's averaging decent amount of assists, but he's not orchestrating an offense, right? So he's still just this dependent threat that's relying on other ball handlers to get him the ball. And as we've seen, when he's on the floor with limited ball vision, right? Whether it be Taylor Horton-Tucker or Colin Sexton, and he needs to rely on those guys to help feed him opportunities. He ends up where he has tonight, 14-7, right? And I think the Mavericks defense with Kleba and with Dwight Powell really did a great job of limiting his ability to get the ball off the catch and make and do some damage. So love Markkanen, but I don't think the guy's going to carry us to 43 wins. So brief little start talking about the Jazz and the piece I wrote and why I went into this having some fun, why I really don't give a shit if the team wins 35 games or 24 games. I think if they actually get up into that playoff level, I think that means that some more interesting discussions will need to be had about some players on this team. Obviously, a better team is going to eventually suck it up and say, we'll take Mike Conley. There's going to be an offer for Kelly Olynyk. I think that's a sneaky thing that people don't realize is that Kelly Olynyk is not long for this Jazz team, I don't think. He's too good of a player. He's completely rehabilitated his value from his stints in Houston and Detroit where he was really miscast. I hated Kelly Olynyk. I hated watching him play, watching him in the playoffs in Boston and Miami, just an annoying, flop-drawing player, not very aesthetic looking dude. And then he goes in Houston and puts up a bunch of numbers for a shit team. No one cares. No one cared. Goes to Detroit where he's in this front court logjam with, they had Marvin Bagley at the time, which was weird, Isaiah Stewart, and just a total logjam there in Detroit. And he got injured, so no one really had any idea if Olynyk was on his way out of the league, right? So the Bogdanovich trade for Olynyk, everyone's thinking total salary move. This doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Gets the Jazz under the tax so they can be a little bit more flexible on a Conley trade to bring back more money. None of you care about that. But what we have seen is all of a sudden Olynyk might be worth an asset to a team. And so he's a guy that will get losing basketball, especially if his minutes require more Walker Kessler minutes or Jared Vanderbilt minutes as you need to shore up the front court, or Simone Fontecchio, right? We've only seen a scratch of Fontecchio, right? But he, aside from, he has a good third quarter scoring stretch and then gets absolutely torched in his next game and does not really quite look ready for the court. Olynyk being out will really open up the losing, I think. And so I think he's not quite long for this team. I have no information on this, but I still sneaky think, if Lauri Markkanen is, all of a sudden has really turned some GM's heads, right? And some GM is look, man, great getting Markkanen from the Donovan Mitchell trade. I know you guys want to get a lot worse, and they offer some sort of stupid package for Markkanen. Ainge is going to listen to that, I think. And I don't think they're not listening. They're not actively shopping or doing anything like that. But everyone on this team, aside from, I think, the rookies themselves, are curios across the league ready ripe for discussion, right? We've loved Jared Vanderbilt on this team, but if a team thinks that they need what he provides, great, let's bring him on board. So great start, and the point of what I wrote today was all about enjoy what we're actually watching on the court, and if you are bemoaning a win over the Grizzlies at home, if you're bemoaning the win against Denver, the first game of the season and how electric that was, I implore you to do something else, go enjoy life somehow else, because those are the small things that we can enjoy. And I just don't think that there's a material difference between what this roster is and what it can be and winning 24 games versus 35 games. So I'll stop with that. Game today. There was a game today. I'll start talking about that. I had a lot of fun today, and this was really a Luka Doncic quite show. I mean, every Mavericks game is going to be a Doncic show, and there's never not a single player in the NBA that you can sick on Doncic and say, let's lock him down, right? Because he's going to figure out a way to pass his way out of good defense or figure out a way to get his points, whatever. He's averaging 37 points already. That's an absurd amount. And yeah, there's going to be times where you can sick a good defender on him and maybe cause him into some turnovers today. He had 5 turnovers today. Most of them, I think 4 of them were all in the first half. And really force him into making tough decisions. What I loved about the Jazz first half defense that we didn't quite see in the second half, and partially because of the Mavericks personnel that they wielded in the second half, is the Jazz forced the Mavericks, and especially Luka, to make a very difficult pass. Now, against Luka Doncic, that's usually going to be a death knell because he knows where the most difficult pass is. He can throw backwards passes behind his head with pinpoint accuracy. But sometimes you catch Luka not willing to do that, especially early on in the game. He's just going to try to make the simple read to a guy in the corner or the guy wraparound pass on the interior and just force him to make a difficult pass and see if he's going to attempt that difficult pass, which is, by the way, no sure thing for him. He's great at doing it, and I mentioned he will complete those. And the most difficult pass when you're being aggressive is usually going to be a guy completely wide the fuck open. So you end up with, it's a risky play against a player like Luka who is going to find the widest open guy, or even the guy right next to him who can quickly do a touch pass over. It's risky against him, but I loved how they were willing to see if Luka was game for that today, right? And so if Luka's just going to blow by or back down players who are guarding him, Utah played switching defense on Luka pretty much all game. Then let's just fly bodies at him and see if he's going to make difficult passes. Sure enough, he had a shitload of turnovers early, and that gave Utah a 14-point lead after the first quarter. And then things started really slowing down for Luka, started exploiting the switches, backed down Jordan Clarkson in the post a bunch of times, found open players because they had a little bit more of a 5-out mentality towards the second half. And there's just, even if you were to force Luka to make the difficult pass in a 5-out situation, none of those passes are terribly difficult, right? We were forcing him to throw it behind his head, not like a crazy wild behind the head no look pass, but just like they would send the defense in a certain way where all he had to do was just kind of toss it behind his head to the wing guy who was wide open, right? Now, what I will credit the Jazz defense this year versus the shit we saw in the playoffs last year is the guys were flying around, absolutely doing their best, flying around and saying, we know we're going to get beat, and we know we have to just make crazy diving efforts because we know where the ball is swinging. We know where the ball is going after Luka passes it, instead of just leaving a guy wide open. I think the Bullock 3 at the end was just that defense executed like at a C+, B- level. Luka has the ball against Mike Conley after a switch. Vanderbilt was the one who started on Luka, but they did a simple switch. So Vanderbilt ends up covering Dinwiddie on the left wing while Luka's kind of meandering with the ball on the right wing. Vanderbilt cheats over to Doncic to force him to give the ball up, but here's where everything ends up being a C+ in this critical possession late where Bullock hits that corner 3. Vanderbilt doesn't double Luka. He ends up in this weird no man's land. And Vanderbilt's maybe a rare player who might be able to get away with that because of his ranginess, his diving and everything. But Luka's too good of a passer, and he's aware of every defender's skill set and what they are and they can be, that he knows the exact moment where Vanderbilt is in no man's land. So it's a quick swing to Dinwiddie. Now, here's another C+ thing that I have a problem with. So you have Bullock in the left corner who's going to be open here. Jordan Clarkson, his man is Bullock in the left corner, and Vanderbilt, as I described, was cheating over from Dinwiddie over to Doncic. Now, Vanderbilt, because he's Jared Vanderbilt, actually manages to get 80% of the way back to Dinwiddie. And Dinwiddie's a fine three-point shooter. He's having a great season from 3, but he's historically kind of okay. And between a Dinwiddie 80% contested wing 3 versus a Bullock corner 3, I'm going to take the wing 3. So Clarkson's already kind of cheating the paint from Doncic having the ball. And Dinwiddie quickly swings it over to Bullock because Vanderbilt's closing in on him. And Clarkson is too far away from Bullock, the paint, or Dinwiddie to make a real play on intercepting that ball. And so he's in no position to he goes for the ball, he completely misses it. Bullock gets the shot for the open 3. One possession that I think describes the Jazz defense today against Luka, which is send a double. You heard Will Hardy yelling players' names out who he thought were doubling late, like Lauri Markkanen was guilty of 3 different Lowry's from Will Hardy today because he wasn't doubling early enough, and then forcing Luka to make the difficult pass. And if he makes the easy pass, making sure that the guy who is doubling is someone like a Jared Vanderbilt or like a Taylor Horton Tucker who can get back and guard that player, and then just start the frenetic energy, right? Force the other players to start making passes well. And the Mavericks had a few turnovers in the first half, but they really started to figure out, okay, where are the Jazz going to start coming from? And then eventually the second main thing that the Mavericks figured out is the Jazz don't have any vertical defensive threat at all, right? Like, we know that the Jazz can't defend the rim at all. They're playing this frenetic defense, similar to how Minnesota played defense last year with Karl Towns at center, who can't protect the rim. It's just a bunch of frenetic energy and hope it works and hope you get enough offense to win some games out of it. That's why I think, like, the Jazz aren't going to win 43 games, guys. It's fine. Like, their defense is pretty bad, like, on a night-to-night basis. You just can't keep this up. So the Mavericks figured out pretty early on that, like, there's just going to be no rim protection there. So we saw alley-oop after alley-oop. Dwight Powell played 19 minutes today off the bench, plus 25. That is nuts of a plus-minus for a guy who only plays 19 minutes. And that was because he was putting a ton of pressure on the rim. Offensively, no one could really stop him, and Luka's a great passer at that. But also Powell was getting, and Christian Wood were getting passes from all the Mavericks ball handlers who have really figured out how to get him the ball, how to get Christian Wood the ball. JaVale McGee started, and he was fine, but eventually they realized that, hey, our options at center are Kleba, Powell, and Wood. Like, let's keep that going. And Christian Wood had his usual horrible defensive lapses, lack of awareness, complaining about foul calls, but offensively he ended up figuring it out, right? 1 of 5 from 3. The Jazz were totally fine letting him shoot threes, but that guy just clowned all of the Jazz big men around the rim. Rebounding, Wood had 2 offensive rebounds, 10 rebounds overall in only 23 minutes. So 2 offensive rebounds in 23 minutes is pretty good. And he played pretty well. -7 for him because of the defensive issues, but for a bench big man, he really figured out how to take advantage of a lot of situations. In particular, Walker Kessler just couldn't be on the court today. They tried putting him on Josh Green like we did with Rudy Gobert, and Kessler does not have Gobert's instincts to when does he come from the corner and provide help. So we just, when you're thinking to yourself, hey, we have a guy who just got back from an illness, who is active, who is this rim protector, shouldn't we have had him out there? But you just can't put him on a guy like Christian Wood because Christian Wood is good enough offensively to match him like that. Also, it's just kind of better to put a guy like Kessler on a complete non-shooter like Josh Green, who did hit 1 3 today, but his jump shot's totally broken, and he's basically worse than Matisse Thybulle at this point. So Kessler just was kind of out of position and just wasn't quick enough. Maybe just getting his win back, but very kind of blah performance from him today. Pause here and take a drink of beer. Welcome to the Salt City Hoops live postcast. Got some folks here. Glad to have you here. Drinking for the folks on the spaces, I got a 9.3% Imperial Porter, casual Wednesday drink, but this is my mere second drink. So we're not having a ton of these, but we're having a great time. Colin Sexton played a ton of minutes today, and I was really happy to see him get some minutes, just to see what he played a lot with Mike Conley, and I've come around to having Clarkson start because Clarkson is playing so well, and Clarkson has really elevated his game to being, okay, it makes sense for him to be a rangy player. But against the Mavericks, we saw a lot of Conley, Sexton, and Clarkson, or Colin, Sexton, and Malik Beasley. I think there was one lineup that was quite unusual. That was, I think it was only for a couple minutes, but we had Conley, Clarkson, Sexton, and Malik Beasley out there with Jared Vanderbilt, right? So it's just like a super, super small lineup. Was not effective, but it was only for a couple minutes. So I struggle to make real determinations on what a lineup like that looks like if they're only going to play for a little bit. But Sexton and Conley played a lot together, and I'm fine with the experiment, if only because I think the Jazz need to figure out what Colin Sexton is. and Sexton was great in the fourth quarter. The Mavericks were surprisingly willing to put Luka on him. I think they were really daring Sexton to shoot today. I don't think the Mavericks trusted Sexton in their game plan to be a truly good scorer, and he wasn't super efficient today of 7 for 16, but he really came alive in the fourth quarter, blowing by Doncic, getting some free throws. Quite happy with how Colin played today. Had a couple bad turnovers. His defense was kind of come and go, but the Mavericks are such a pinpoint team that I just hope you can just put an iPad in front of them and say, hey, this is how the team exploited you defensively. His energy's good, his give a shit level is good, and if you put that guy on defense, I think you can trust that he's going to figure it out as far as like a guy who's not going to kill you, right? I have no hope of Sexton being a stopper defender or even a good defender, but as long as he's giving a shit and kind of rebounding well and giving them hell, I think he can fit on the next Jazz contending lineup, right? Maybe that is as a sixth man that completely puts pressure on the rim and everything. But we'll see. My favorite player, Talen Horton-Tucker, minus 10 today in 14 minutes. You look at his stat line and say, oh, he's 1 for 1 from the field, no rebounds, no assists, no steals, no blocks, no turnovers, remarkably. THT was thankfully reluctant to shoot, right? He had some opportunities where he was thinking about shooting or driving or passing, and I'm not trying to like neuter a guy as far as like what his optimal version of him can be, but so far we've either seen completely unwilling to do anything THT, which we saw today, versus willing to do absolutely fucking everything, and I think that's just way too disparate of what we need from him. Like, just continue to drive the paint and be effective. Use those long arms defensively and getting on the glass. Be the team's best offensive rebounder, right? Like, get in, muck it up that way. And instead, we just saw a guy who's just kind of like, well, if I'm not going to shoot the ball, what am I doing out here? And so he ends up, he didn't play, his defense was kind of whatever. Not very great from him. So not a huge fan. Kelly Olynyk, want to quickly mention that the dude just cannot stop fucking fouling. So I looked it up, and yeah, he's having a rough foul year compared to prior years. So he currently is in the 9th percentile. He's fouling on 6% of defensive possessions, and his career is somewhere around like 4.5, right? So. And for centers, centers are always going to be challenging the rim and defending the play at the rim. So it makes sense that like a center is going to have like a pretty high foul rate, but 6% is just like an insane amount for him. He's just committing off-ball fouls all the time. He's not getting the benefit of the doubt from officials, so that was very frustrating. The other thing I wanted to figure out is if like can Mike Conley shoot the ball? Is his floater dead? And he was fine today. 8 assists. Love watching Conley play this sort of old man game, but he's a complete non-threat at all, shooting the basketball off the dribble towards the rim. He's his short mid-range jumper, right? So that's floater range, as you would call it. So last year, 80th percentile, 45% from the field. The year before that, 73rd percentile, 46% from the field. That year that he completely was terrible for Utah, his first year after the trade, where he couldn't shoot the ball at all. His effective field goal percentage was under 50%. He was 45th percentile still in floater range at 36%, which is still really bad, and you really wouldn't trust that. But I mentioned that as a point of reference because this year he's shooting 21% from floater range, 16th percentile in the NBA. His floater is completely dead right now, and it's really like pretty cringy to watch. He's a pro. I don't see his legs being worse. I don't see him not having as much lift. His floater game was always crafty, and he being a shorter guy, it's more of like surprising the defense with the floater than really like getting up and like doing that real athletic floater that is almost a finger roll for some of these swingmen. No, it's like a surprising little like, okay, he's a point guard in the lane, shoot a floater. He's shooting 21% right now, which is real shit. But I expect that to improve, hopefully enough to convince some teams to trade some picks for him pretty soon. And Vanderbilt was his usual self. I don't think the stats really show that he was everything you want him to be. The 3-point experiment continues. He was 1-1 from 3. His jumper's completely broken. I still have no trust in it. If I'm a defense, I'm not trusting it at all. 2-2 from the free throw line. They did one of those overhead shots of him shooting a free throw, and there are 2 hitches in it as he releases it, and you're just like, you're cringing as he shoots it. I'll mention this every time as long as we get new audiences. So what you need from Jared Vanderbilt offensively to improve, and if you want Vanderbilt to be part of the next Jazz team, and the reason Denver was willing to trade him after him being a bench warmer for the Nuggets, and the reason the Timberwolves were pretty much willing to throw him in for salary matching purposes for Rudy Gobert, is everything else offensively needs a ton of work. So really like his passing game that has come alive in the past couple games. He had 7 assists the other night in like 20 minutes, so that was awesome. He had 3 assists today. He should have had 4. He had this insane no-look pass in the lane to Jordan Clarkson. It wasn't like a fake no-look. It was a straight-up no-look pass to him, not on the fast break, within the flow of the offense. I think after an offensive rebound, but still a ton of bodies around. And Clarkson bonered the layup, so that was pretty disappointing. So he might have had 4 assists today in 33 minutes. But his feel for finishing around the basket, I love how every broadcast they mentioned that in the offseason or in media day, he mentioned that he was very specific that he wants to be better at finishing around the rim. And he's gotten a little better each game, I think, but he's still pretty poor at anything other than gets fed the ball for a wide open layup or dunk. And today, I thought his most impressive play was a shot he missed, but he gets the ball off of a screen and roll action where he's got a ton of lane to work with. And this is in the first quarter, he gets the ball and he's about to rise up for a dunk, and JaVale McGee makes a great lateral play to contest the play at the rim, and Vanderbilt actually readjusts in the air and gets a pretty great layup attempt off, and it was just an inch away from rolling in. And I haven't seen Vanderbilt readjust in the air like that so confidently before. In prior years, it would be, and this season, frankly, it would be if he's readjusting in the air, now he's just flinging up garbage from below the rim. And this was a play where he readjusted in the air and kept his verticality to get a great layup attempt off. And that's what needs to happen for him to be a 10-point game guy that plays for 28 minutes instead of 8 points and 10 rebounds is like, that's just a guy. Like, it's fun. We love watching Jared Vanderbilt play. And if his defense is going to be, this B+ level, because he's still not a stopper level defender. He's a very good defender, but he's not a stopper. Then the offense needs to come along with it, right? So if the passing goes from an F to a D+, if the shooting goes from an F to a D+, and the finishing around the rim goes from a C to a B, now you got a player, right? Now you got a player that you're willing to put out there and just fuck shit up and do Jared Vanderbilt things. But we've seen sometimes he plays 20 minutes because his feel for the game is limited and he can't shoot, and so sometimes you need some different personnel out there. He's still my second favorite Jazz man, though, to Jordan Clarkson, because who doesn't love Jared Vanderbilt? So my criticisms of him are really just because I want Jared Vanderbilt to be a Jazz man for a long time, and I don't want him to be just a throw-in piece for the next trade that happens or whatever. I want Vanderbilt to be a thing for the Jazz, and so those are the things I'll be watching for him. Is he actually a sneaky good passer? I love him handling the ball off the break. Out of all the big men that the Jazz have had this year and over the past couple years, Vanderbilt's probably the only big man when he's dribbling the ball up the court. I'm not worried about him getting the ball poked from behind. How many times do we watch a Jazz man, like a big man, like a Jonas Jerebko or any of those fours that we've had, this happened to Jay Crowder all the fucking time. I'm not talking Rudy Gobert, but any large player, right? Any large forward type getting the ball, and they would have the license to dribble the ball up the court just to get the play moving, and the ball would get poked out from behind, right? It probably didn't happen to them more often than other teams, but we as fans, as we're watching the broadcast angle, we see it happening, right? And Vanderbilt, because he's just always looking for people doing the shit he likes to do, he knows when the guys are coming up behind him, and he really shields them off. It's these really dumb things I noticed, which is why you're tuning in today to hear me talk about that. But I'm pretty confident when he dribbles the ball up the court. And to that end, like, is the passing going to follow from that, right? Like, is he just going to, in the semi-break off of a miss, the defense isn't quite set, you get a cutting marketing, boom, that's 2 points from Vanderbilt on a pass. So I'm pretty optimistic that we're going to see a great Vanderbilt season as the year continues. But those are the things I'm looking for out of him. I talked about Markkanen being a dependent threat and why he only ended up with 14 points today. That three-point shooting's got to come around because all 4 of those looks were great, missed all of them. I'm just thrilled with Jordan Clarkson, this new addition, because this is a capital P player now. Love watching him play. Malik Beasley was a little selfish today. Don't care. Love watching Malik Beasley be selfish because I think that's how it really matters for him to get his shots and shoot threes. He had a great step back off the dribble three today that was really nice, and I think some of his other selfishness was there was a couple times he probably could have passed it, but like Beasley, I think, steps into that Clarkson role of just being like, look, man, when you're out there, you stretch the defense being just like a guy who shoots like no other, right? And forcing guys to defend in that situation. So, and especially for like a growing Jazz team, right? If Beasley's going to be part of the future, what can he be? Can you extend his 3-point ability to these really difficult shots? Or is he really just like, spot up guy, maybe he can do a step back every once in a while, but really you can't trust him to really stress a defense? I'm fine him exploring that a little bit. I think I've talked about everybody who played today, except for Rudy Gay, who was Rudy Gay and was fine. I thought the Rudy Gay Christian Wood matchup for a while was really disappointing to watch, if only because Gay couldn't take advantage of Wood very often, and so Dallas was totally fine putting Christian Wood on Rudy Gay defensively. And then on the other end, Christian Wood was kind of doing his thing. Rudy Gay was fine, probably just not his best matchup, having to either chase Mavericks guards around or having to play against the forwards of Dallas, who are pretty sizable. So that's talking about everybody. Mavericks were great. Luke, really no answers for Luka today. As just a guy who was able to exploit the defense in the second half. Didn't see a ton of step back threes from Luka, which was thankful because those are still the shots that I have no idea how they go in. But the story today was really just him taking advantage of Utah in the second half, being slow and figuring out where the easy passes were going to be, or just simply scoring over Sexton, scoring over Clarkson. Utah insisted on switching everything, which you have to do against a Luka team, really. Or he's just going to crush you on the pick and roll and have alley-oop dunks to Powell or Kleba all game long. So you're doing the switching, so you can't really defend him with the personnel Utah have. I know a lot of people said just put Vanderbilt on him, but if you put Vanderbilt on him and you get screened off, and then all of a sudden you have Olynyk guarding him, not necessarily on a switch, but in that sort of moment where Vanderbilt's trying to get around the screen, and that also sets up Luka's step back 3 game, right, which you really want to limit. And it was really just trying to force Luka to be a passer, and they did a pretty good job in the first half and couldn't do it in the second half. And all of a sudden you get a huge Luka Doncic game. Wasn't a 50-pointer. It was fine. But it is what it is. The Jazz pretty much lost to 3 guys today, and Doncic, Dinwiddie, and Wood. And Dwight Powell's plus 25 in 19 minutes. And the Jazz just didn't quite have enough. Right, this isn't a blowout. This is 103-100. This was a great performance for a team on the road. So I'll pause for a minute to catch up on any comments in the chat, or if anybody wants to speak on the spaces, I'll let you in if you don't suck, and take a break for 30 seconds. Check out the other scores we got going on today. See that Donovan Mitchell's team keeps winning. He had 24, 4, and 6 in 44 minutes in overtime against the Boston Celtics. A lot of games today to catch up on. My goodness. I'm gonna get the Lakers are up at halftime against New Orleans. We'll have to tune into that as we get going. And Memphis and Portland are locked in a tight one on ESPN. Washington beats Philly on the road. Atlanta beats New York on the road. Sacramento gives Miami a tough one on the road, but Miami pulls it out. Chicago thumps Charlotte at home. Clippers take care of Houston easily. Milwaukee takes care of Detroit easily. And Toronto, plus 43, scores 143 against the San Antonio Spurs, who they also were equally a surprising 5-2 going into tonight's action. So very surprising to see the Spurs doing well. But again, you have guys like Jacob Poeltl and competent starters and everything. Gorgie Jang still plays for them, by the way, and is actually having a pretty nice year. But they dropped. They lost by 43 at home to the Raptors, who are liable to always just totally punk teams like this. Very fun team to watch. So, absent any commentary from the crowd, I love this team. I had a blast today. I hope you walk away from today thinking, you know what, I had fun watching the Jazz tonight. Then that's what I think it's about, and I think that's what this team is providing. The assist numbers are up, the steal numbers are up. Defense isn't great, but the offense is fine. That was fun. That was a really fun matchup today. I'll spare you the advanced stats. Talk about that in the next one. We got Clippers or Lakers coming up. We got two staples. I'm sorry, Crypto.com Arena. That naming license is probably going to be real shit pretty soon. It's funny how Crypto.com spends $200 million on naming rights, and they probably are going to be insolvent within the year. Friday night, 8:30 Mountain against the Lakers, and then 8 o'clock Mountain against the Clippers. So maybe I'll be able to watch these games live instead of catching up 45 minutes late after I put the boys down to bed. So this is the Salt City Hoops postcast. Love doing these as always. Love doing these on a Wednesday with some beers. I'm gonna probably rewatch this game tonight to catch some of the stuff that I fast forwarded through a little bit. Hear some of the commentary from Thurl and Holly, because I adore this broadcast team. Quick note, by the way, before we sign off. I live in Denver, and I used to live in New York, and I have sat behind the bench for the Jazz coming into wherever I was living for ever since I lived in New York. So that was and Philly, before that I lived in Philly. So that would be it's 12 years of seeing Jazz games, right? And I've only really seen them on the road. I've seen 3 home Jazz games in my life, having traveled outside of Utah for so long. And so sitting behind the bench in Philly, sitting behind the bench in New York, sitting behind the bench in Denver, I got Matt Harpering to wave to me 4 times, right? And, I'm not obnoxious. I'm not being like, hey, Matt, hey. It would just be when he was within earshot, I'd be like, Matt Harpering, love you. Thanks for commenting, or whatever dumb shit I'm going to say. And a lot of times it would be very obvious he was intentionally trying to ignore the Jazz fans in the arena and just trying to leave. It was really annoying. And this is the first game I've been able to see where Thurl Bailey was the color guy for a Jazz game. No Holly Rowe, because it was this was the Denver game last week. No Holly Rowe, because I think she was on college football duty somewhere else. And Thurl dapped up every single Jazz fan. And he was, after he got done with his, pregame spiel or whatever, he walked up and down all throughout the lower bowl just trying to say hi to Jazz fans and take photos with them. And that really made my day, right? That was just really cool. So one more reason to hate Matt Harpering, who sucks. And just want to leave you guys with a fun note about Thurl Bailey, who I just learned, by the way. I don't know if he's really all that fluent. I think he's pretty fluent. He actually knows Italian from doing mission work in Italy, and I don't know exactly, if someone in the chat wants to correct me, that when he played for the Jazz, he converted to the Church of Latter-day Saints, and and then he does a mission in Italy while he's playing professional basketball in Italy, learns Italian, so now he speaks Italian with Simone Fontecchio. I thought that was a really cool anecdote that I learned the other day. So there were probably some details of what I just said that are completely fucking wrong. But I do know he was in Italy and learned a little Italian, and I think that's pretty cool and shows what he's a gentleman. That's not surprising out of Thurl Bailey, so that's pretty cool. Let's catch the Lakers. Let's make sure they lose tonight. So we're catching them doing their thing on Friday night and keep the Lakers losing. That's another thing to enjoy about this season, right? It's just the Lakers losing. And we can keep that going. They do present a personnel challenge for Utah, right? With verticality with Anthony Davis, the power of LeBron James. We'll see what we can do to battle them with guys like Vanderbilt and Markkanen. And that'll be an interesting matchup. I'm kind of waxing on nothing here, so I will let you guys go. Thank you so much for tuning in to Salt City Hoops Postcast and beer. Got my beer that I got to finish after I get offline today, and I really thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll catch you Friday night after the Lakers game. Good night.